The 11th floor by Jonah 11. Peter was not woken up by the storm or by the snoring coming from his brother. He woke up from the thumping coming from the floor above. Peter lived in a nice-looking apartment, but I said nice looking. The actual apartment building The actual apartment building on the inside was like any other building until you get to the top. The building had 12 floors, each with 30 rooms, except for the top 2 floors. They were all one big house, formerly owned by a rich man, but the man died. Ever since that moment, 2 years ago, when he died, the noises coming from the 11th floor never stopped. And after 2 years of hearing the sounds, Peter finally cracked. He had to find out what was going on upstairs. With little hesitation, Peter threw the covers off his body and crept out of the room, careful not to wake his brother. He tiptoed into the kitchen and out the door. The second Peter stepped out of the door, the banging turned to scratching. The sound was flat out horrible. It was almost like somebody was scratching knives down a chalkboard. And even worse, Peter had sworn he could have sworn that he heard a small voice screeching, "Peter, Peter, I'm on the next step. Peter, Peter, I'm gonna get you." Peter tried to pretend that he heard nothing, but the voice kept on getting louder and louder until there was no denying it. The dim light of the hallway made Peter's shadow knock him on the wall. As Peter got closer to the stairs on the 11th floor, his shadow seemed as though it walked away. Was the shadow really chickening out on him? Suddenly, the hallway lights went out. Peter stood still, unaware of the things around him. The hairs on Peter's neck stood up. Something was in front of him. He backed up slowly and screamed. There was a small hairy thing behind him, and poor old Peter just had the fortune to trip over it. The thing squeaked, and though Peter could not see it, the thing smiled over its good fortune. It began to stroke his neck with clawed hands. Peter tried to get up, but the thing grabbed Peter's neck. It squeezed him, and Peter's eyes bulged. The claws dug into his skin. Thoughts of death crossed the poor boy's mind. It was all over at age 11. But behind Peter, an echoing, high-pitched voice began to sing, "Beware, beware, Peter, Peter, they're gonna get you. They'll take you away, away, away. He's there. Peter, Peter, he's on the next step. He's gonna get you." Peter's breathing got faster and faster, and his heart began to pound hard. The thing patted him and whispered something about life and said, "There is no escaping." The voice faded into darkness, and the lights came back on. The thing was nowhere to be seen, but what was there that wasn't there before was a door in the wall. Peter picked himself up. He rubbed his sore neck and inched toward the door. Should he go in or go back? Was it worth the risk of life? While Peter pondered about what to do, the door began to fade away. There might not have been any other chances to go investigate. So Peter jumped toward the door and seized the handle. A scream erupted from the room as soon as he put his hand on the doorknob. It seemed as though it said, "Last step!" Peter changed his mind about going inside, but his hand would not come off the doorknob. It was almost as if the door was holding on to Peter. Suddenly, the world began to spin. It twisted and turned, and suddenly, the whole world went blank. Peter opened his eyes. Everything was blurry. When his eyes focused, he let out a scream. Peter was in an even dimmer lighted room that was full of dust. And right in front of him was a wide-eyed, was not in the hall. Was a wide-eyed, vacant-looking baby with no hair and claws. Its smile was distant and grim. Peter got off the floor and backed away. He felt the door behind him and tried to open it, not brave enough to take his eyes off the baby. Though he tried, the door did not budge. He shook the handle and pulled hard. Yet the almost stubborn door stayed put. Peter tried to shake off the thoughts of being in a haunted floor forever, when suddenly the baby talked. "Peter, Peter, I want mommy, I want mommy." And that was when it dawned on Peter. The baby was no longer living. Peter nodded and smiled, and then ran around the baby. It began to sob, and when Peter glanced back, he saw the baby crying blood and chasing him. Peter ran through some oversized cobwebs along with some creaky floorboards. He sped into a room with a table, an empty fireplace, and stairs. Peter nearly flew up to the 12th floor, well aware that there was a zombie baby behind him. Peter's feet pounded on the stairs, waking things that should not be awake. At the top, there were 7 doors. Peter glanced behind him and saw the baby halfway up the stairs. He quickly ran to the closest room, slammed the door, and locked it. The room was pitch black. While Peter caught his breath and tried to look for a light switch, something caught his attention. 2 big brown eyes gleaming in the darkness. Peter strained his own eyes to see the owner. Then he jumped as the lights flicked on. All that was there was a portrait of a blonde-haired girl with a lifeless expression. Peter checked the rest of the room out with disapproval. The drapers were ripped up, clothes were all over the floor, and a thick layer of dust coated everything. Though this was horrible, the worst part was the windows. They were rusted, and it seemed as though there was blood on them. And the blood looked as though it had come from a hand that was dragged down. Peter looked at the bed, which might have had something under the blankets. As he looked, there was a sudden sound coming from the door. It was scratches. "No, Mommy!" the zombie wailed. It was outside the door. Peter waited as in horror as the door began to get ripped up. Out of nowhere, the picture exploded. Peter turned around just in time to see the picture shine a light on the bed. Soon, something began to move under the blankets. "I'm back! I'm free! Now to get the one who freed me!" shrieked the creature in the bed. This was just like a go to Peter, and he did not need to be told twice. He threw the door open and slammed the zombie baby into the wall. He ran down the stairs faster than he thought he could go. At the bottom, something strange happened. The fireplace that before looked as though nothing had even noticed it for years was ablaze. And besides that, there were 2 half-destroyed chairs facing the fire. For a moment, Peter forgot about the zombie baby and the bed monster, until something jumped on Peter. He wiggled around, but all he could manage was to turn to face the thing on top of him. It had a little resemblance to the person in the picture. It had the same colored eyes, the same colored hair, and its face looked like the girl's face a little bit. The thing on top of Peter was cross-eyed, had much messier hair, and had a smile too big for its face. Plus, the weird girl had only half of her teeth. "Leave him!" There was something in the chairs. Both of them spun around, and there was nothing in them. "Ghosts," Peter whispered. Somehow, the demented person saw something, because it winced and melted into the shadows. "Hello, Peter. I have been waiting for you," creaked a voice that sounded more like a creaky door than anything. Peter spun around and around and around, looking for the speaker. Maybe it was just a voice, or maybe it was a ghost. Peter would not have found out if the owner had not said, "I'm behind you, Peter." Peter turned around again and saw a slim figure. The figure looked regular and down, but his face was covered in black bandages. All that could be seen of his face were 2 violet eyes and a mouth with a tongue that poked out too much. The man was silhouetted against the darkness. He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. Peter knew perfectly well why the man was smiling. Peter was completely petrified. It was half because of how the man looked, and half because Peter knew the man in front of him. Only one person Peter ever knew had violet eyes, and it was the man who owned the house. "You were warned about this place, I hope?" the man rasped. "Yes, sir," Peter stammered. The man nodded, and for a short while, there was an awkward silence. Then Peter was plucking up his courage to do something very daring. Then the man said, "There's nowhere to hide, Peter. You walked in and you won't walk out." With that, the man reached for Peter's face. But Peter had different plans and was ready. He threw a punch at the man's stomach, although Peter's hand went right through the man. The old owner laughed and grabbed Peter's face. "Ghost!" Peter cried. "No, stupid boy, shadow. I'm a shadow. You cannot see ghosts, and the ghost cannot touch you. Meanwhile, shadows can touch you while you can't touch them. Plus, shadows are visible." The shadow had an air of pride when he said that. Peter screamed, but the people under Peter's feet were used to hearing screams. They slept on. Meanwhile, the shadow was taking Peter to a window. The owner threw the window open with a creak and lifted Peter into the air. It was really the end then. Peter thrashed about, but to no use. The man licked Peter's ear as if to say goodbye. Then the shadow opened his hand. Peter dropped like a rock. The shadow slammed the musty window closed with a bang. The wind hit Peter so hard that it hurt. There was no escaping gravity, but anything can happen. And by anything, I mean anything. So anything includes fire escape. Peter landed one floor below on the fire escape. He looked into the window, and somehow, by luck, he saw his cozy bed. Peter climbed inside quietly and shut the window, and he lay awake for the rest of the night. He also lay awake for many nights to come, thinking about the words, "You cannot hide." In the morning, he suggested leaving. It took little consideration. 2 days later, Peter's whole family moved to another state. They were never bothered again, until a night some 20 years later, when the whole night was nearly forgotten. Peter Jr. saw something in the window. It was a face, and it had a smile. For it knew that Peter was not dead, and he was hiding. This meant that they